Hey friends, I shall be gone this week in Puerto Rico, assisting with ongoing hurricane recovery. Mr. Davis, Mr. Extremes, and Dr. Creepin have graciously provided their voices in my stead. I shall return to my normal narration schedule Monday, March 12th, but until then, please show some love and support to my talented guests. Thank you, friends, and I'll see you again soon. This happened to me nearly 3 years ago, but I'm still feeling the effects of it. When I was 16, I lived in my parents' basement. Didn't realize how bad that sounded till I said it. Anyways, I had a little pad down there until I graduated. Then they claimed they would give me 6 months to find a job and move out. Yeah, they love me. There was a door down there leading out to the backyard. Now, it wasn't the sturdiest door. You had to slam it to make sure it was shut, and even then, it was anyone's guess if it was closed. Some nights I would stick a chair under the door handle in case I got a little freaked out. This night, I had forgotten to. I was downstairs in my room, my dog was with me, and my parents were out having dinner. I'd say it was about 9 p.m. when I heard the door open. From where I was sitting, on a little couch we had down there, the door was behind me. I knew it was opened, however, because it always creaked when it did so. So I heard the creak, and then a slam. I jumped up and looked behind me. The door opened and closed repeatedly in the frame. I walked over and saw that the wind was blowing pretty hard, which at the time I figured was the cause. I slammed it shut, put the chair under it, and went back to what I was doing. A few minutes passed, and I kept getting the feeling that someone was watching me. When you live in a basement, that can sometimes happen. However, this actually felt real. Usually I can shake it off, but even my dog Gizmo was acting up. He kept looking over at the staircase and whining. Eventually I gave in to the feeling and called my parents. They didn't answer. Great, I thought. Now what do I do? I called up one of my close friends and luckily he answered. While I was on the phone with him, Gizmo's whimpers slowly grew into a low growl. Now, Gizmo was a little terrier, not the most intimidating. However, he didn't just growl at anything. I hung up on my friend telling him I'd call him back in a little bit and headed over to the staircase. In just about any other basement, you'd be able to see under the staircase, but my mom set up a makeshift playhouse for my cousins a few years back, so there was a black sheet hanging in front of it. I was just a foot away from it when the curtain flew back and someone jumped out and ran straight towards me. It happened so fast I nearly had a heart attack. It was a big guy dressed in all black with a mask over his face, and when he made contact with me, I hit the floor. I ran over to the door, threw the chair out of the way, and made haste through my backyard. My shoulder was pounding. Gizmo had given chase to the intruder. It was a mess. I found my cell phone and called the police. They showed up a few minutes before my parents. The questioning was brief, seeing as I didn't really see what he looked like, but they assured me that they would try their best to find him. The next day, I helped my dad install a new door and security system. As the years passed, we never had any more incidents like that one. I've dealt with it the best I can, but it's kinda hard to forget about having someone literally hiding in your house. I do live alone now, but you better believe I'm paying a little extra every month's rent for the added security. I've been hearing this thing in my attic for about a week before this takes place. Not normal things, mind you, but voices and footsteps. I didn't have anything up there I needed, so I figured I would just be able to live with it. However, the night that convinced me I needed to do something was when I had a nightmare about the attic. In the nightmare, I was standing in the hallway staring up at the door. A few seconds passed and jet black fingers started reaching out from the door. They eventually worked it open and the staircase folded out before me. I stared up into the attic and I could see a tall man with a fedora. Beside him was a small child who was crying. The man pulled out a knife and started to stab the young boy. I woke up soon after from this nightmare. That was the point I knew I had to figure out what was up there and get rid of it. I recruited a close friend and we decided on doing a little ghost hunt. We figured we would need evidence if we were going to get someone in here to bless the house. I dug out my old video camera and decided to use my phone as a voice recorder. I know it wasn't professional, but it would be enough. It was my friend Bobby and myself. We headed up at around 8 p.m. The attic was nearly impossible to navigate. It was complete with flooring and everything. However, the amount of crap I had was insane. We took to a corner opposite of each other, and I started with the questioning. I decided to be straightforward. Is the figure I saw in my dream the other night here tonight? Bobby waved his hand to catch my attention. When I looked over, he was rubbing his arms as if to signify that he was cold. I asked, Are you standing by him right now? I kept my eye trained on him to make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm glad I did. The corner of his jacket was tugged lightly. Bobby's eyes grew wide and he mouthed, Did you see that? I nodded and continued with questioning, trying to keep the camera steady on Bobby. Are you the little boy I saw? All of a sudden, a wave of cold air ran over me. Goosebumps rose over my arms and a sickening pain grew in my gut. It felt like I had been punched by Mike Tyson. I was out of breath, and before I knew it, I doubled over and vomited. Bobby ran over to where I was to see if I was okay. I looked up at him to say I was ready to leave, but I couldn't talk. Standing above him was the man I'd seen in my dream, the man with the fedora. I managed to choke out, Let's leave. And he threw my arm over his shoulder and basically drugged me to the attic door. I went down first, taking my time as I was pretty lightheaded. Bobby started coming down after me. When he was halfway out, he stopped. I called out, Are you alright? He didn't respond at first. Bobby, what's going on, man? Come down. Finally, he responded. There's something up here, man. It's staring right at me. Bobby, come on. We can close it and call someone to take care of it. He started down, making sure to find each step before he went. Soon we were in the hallway and I slammed the attic shut. Over the next few days, I contemplated on who I would call. I knew the local priest seemed to be the best option, so I gave it a shot. Over the phone, I told him all about what had been happening. He was an older man, about 70 years old or so, and had lived in town his whole life. What he told me over the phone shook me. In the late 60s, a small boy was murdered in this house, more specifically, the attic. The man was sentenced to life in prison but was murdered in a cell only a week after being put in. Hearing this gave me a similar sickness in my gut. I asked him what was the soonest he could be out here to bless and cleanse the house. A few days passed with the same activity only getting worse. Eventually the priest was able to show up and cleanse the attic. It's been about a month since this whole debacle, and luckily, I've not experienced anything since. I can't thank that priest enough. Also, to anyone who's listening and may be going through something similar, don't be afraid to reach out for help. It's worth it. Also, you may not be the only one who needs it. I've dealt with sleep paralysis a few times before this, so I knew what was happening when I went through it. However, unlike other times, I wasn't able to wake myself up. Also, this was the worst I've ever had it. I've experienced it after this story takes place as well, but nothing even compares. I was at a sleepover at my friend's house back when sleepovers were cool and we had taken over the basement. His mom and dad had the place decked out for stuff like this, so we were having a ball. Around midnight, though, he fell asleep on the floor while watching Spider-Man. I decided I would do the same, so I closed my eyes and soon fell asleep. I woke up soon after, unable to move. I'm not sure what time it was, but it couldn't have been much after I fell asleep because the credits were rolling on the movie. My eyes were darting across the room, and I was telling myself not to freak out. You've been through this before, I said. Just let it pass. Minutes passed, and I realized this was going to be a hard one to get through. My arms fought to move, but it was as if there were anvils tied to them. I decided on focusing on my friend. Maybe if I could look at something familiar, someone I trusted, I could pull myself out of it. Only issue was that he was facing away from me. Still, I focused on the back of his head, mentally screaming at him to wake up. Another few minutes passed, and I was nearly crying. I was so scared. Then I heard him begin to stir. The fear was momentarily pushed to the side, and I began to feel hope. He would wake up, see I was basically sleeping with my eyes open, and shake me out of it. Sadly, this isn't what happened. He stirred a little longer before his head began turning towards me. Only his head. Like the girl from The Exorcist, he slowly turned his head around completely. His eyes were still closed, but the visual was so wrong, it didn't really help. I felt that fear bellow up, back up from my gut and up to my throat. I fought the feeling, and before I knew it, I rolled off the futon onto the floor. I guess I had broken the spell. My friend jumped up and looked over at me. "You're all right, man? What happened?" I tried to muster a sentence, but all I could say was, I couldn't move. His parents were down there soon after to ask if we were okay. I explained that I just rolled off the futon. I didn't feel like explaining the whole situation. Since that incident, which was years ago, I've not experienced anything as bad. All the spells of it I've had since there were quickly only lasting a few minutes max, and I haven't hallucinated again, either. While browsing some abandoned paranormal forums, I came across a really creepy post. The guy or girl, it's never specified, claims that they used to be a ghost hunter for a really popular ghost hunting show. They didn't give the name, but there were some pictures attached with the cast that pretty much gave it away. I thought you would all like it, so I decided to share it. Here's the post in its entirety. I'm often asked, what's the scariest thing you've ever seen on an investigation? Since I get this question all the time, I've come up with a response that usually fuels everyone's fire enough to move on to the next question. Telling someone I was attacked by a spirit, then pulling up the photos on my phone is pretty terrifying. I'd say this, but that's not the scariest thing. I've kept that to myself for a while. However, now that I've left the show and I'm working on my own, I feel I'm free to share this. The following is a true account from an episode that was never aired. We had been called to a small family home who claimed that they were experiencing some things in their house. Voices, cold spots, things being moved, pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. When we showed up, however, we soon found out that we were getting into more than we had originally planned. We all sat down with one member of the family for interviews. I sat with the mom. She was the one who'd called. She was scared at first to even say anything. I assured her it was okay and eventually coaxed her to talk off camera. She told me that she had been hearing something in the attic every night when she was in bed. It wakes her up, but her husband sleeps through it. As far as she knew, she was the only one who heard it. She described it as a creaking sound, like someone was rocking or swinging. I assured her we would look into it and find her answer. The dad and son didn't have much to add, honestly. They just reiterated what we heard on the phone. I informed the team of what she told me and we set up the game plan. We would start in the living room, where things were supposedly moving, then move through the kitchen into the dining room. We then head up to the second floor to investigate the son's room. There were claims of cold spots and full-bodied apparitions. At 3 hours in, we hadn't gotten much. As a matter of fact, we debunked the cold spots in the living room. It was in the parents' room where we first heard it. That creaking sound the mom was talking about. We all knew where it was coming from too, that attic. It sounded like it was right above their bedroom. We headed up one at a time. It was a finished attic, complete with flooring and insulation. The sound I assumed was something like squirrels or rats. The way it upset her, though, kept a dark thought in the back of my mind. What if it was something more? We all took to one side of the attic. I was rolling on the night vision, Joey was running a digital recorder, and Sammy was asking the questions. We ran through all the basic ones before we got anything notable. I had switched over to FLIR. That's a thermal camera for those who don't know, and in the middle of the attic something was beginning to show up. At first it was like a blob, maybe a cold spot, but as I focused on it, and they asked more questions, it took form. There was a thin, short line coming from the beam in the attic, which led to a large figure that floated about 6 inches from the ground. Then we heard it again, that creaking. It wasn't a squirrel or rats. Something was swaying back and forth. I notified everyone around me and made sure to film it on my camera in case the FLIR malfunctioned. The figures started fading soon after, and then Sammy started coughing. We asked if she was okay, but she kept coughing, and then she started choking. It was like something was stuck in her windpipe or something was choking her. She dropped her camera and grabbed her throat, grabbing at it in hopes of it loosening, but it wouldn't. Her face was turning bright red, and she was starting to bruise around her neck. Together, Joey and I picked her up and walked her to the staircase to the attic. Joey went down first, and I stayed in there to help her down. She was about to pass out by the time we got her out of the house. The tightness lifted, and she slowly but surely caught her breath, and she explained that she could feel something tightening around her neck. We spent the rest of the night blessing the house, mostly the attic. The following morning, we told the owners what we did and showed them a little of the evidence. We kept the footage from the attic under wraps, however. The family went on with their life and all was fine. I did get a letter from the mom thanking us for all we did. Other than that, though, we didn't have any more contact. I hope this post wasn't too much for anyone. It's pretty terrifying to think back about, even now. I moved in my house about a year ago. When I first came, I had way too much crap left over from a bad breakup, so I was happy to see that this new place came with an attic so I could put it up there with the forgotten Santa Claus figurines and tangled colorful lights, only having to work with it once a year. Sadly, a month after moving in, I had to venture up there. I heard some scratching from the ceiling while I was watching television one night and immediately thought about squirrels or raccoons ransacking the entire attic. Being that I was near broke after just moving in, I had no money for a professional, so I googled things like squirrel nest and signs of a squirrel infestation, and once I felt I was well informed, I headed up to the attic. The creaky old fold-out stairs scared me more than any rodent would, honestly. They wobbled a little more than I was comfortable with. Regardless, I didn't want any uninvited guests, so I started my investigation. I checked all the corners, around the base of the rafters, under the boxes and totes. Nothing. There were no signs whatsoever. No droppings, no nests, and not a single scratch mark. Great. I climbed all the way up here for nothing, I thought to myself, feeling defeated and outsmarted by a giant rat with a fluffy tail, most likely. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My head shot up. I thought for a second I was just hearing things, but then it happened again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. That last one was drawn out like it was deliberate. I pinpointed the sound to be coming from the opposite side of the attic, the side with no flooring. Sweating my butt off and really just feeling done with the whole ordeal, I gave up and decided to call someone out the next day. They weren't going to do anything more than expected for an infestation, so it wouldn't cost much, but I needed some answers. The guy came out and searched everywhere up there. He even walked across the wood planks on the unfinished side. Of course, he came up with nothing. He told me what I already knew. No signs of an infestation. I paid the guy and he left. Not 20 minutes later, while cooking dinner, I heard the scratching again. That same triple scratch I had heard all those times before. I figured the rodents were trolling me again, so I banged on the ceiling with my broom handle screaming, "You're driving me nuts!" Pun intended. The scratching promptly stopped. It worked so well, the next few months I would carry the broom around with me everywhere just in case I heard it. A simple tap-tap would put a stop to it for a while, sometimes a whole day if I was lucky. Of course, though, all good things must come to an end. Eventually, the broom wouldn't suffice, and neither did my puns. About a month ago, I took to the ceiling with a broom, and instead of the scratching coming to a stop, I heard a loud crash. Oh God! Apparently I had knocked something over, I thought. Knowing I would have to clean it up eventually, I pulled that little chain in the hallway and brought down the creaky stairs one more time. For some reason, when I looked up the staircase this time, a different feeling fell over me. It was dread, but not the kind I usually feel. Normally I thought about the heat and claustrophobic setting, but this time it was different. It was a type of dread that made me think something terrible was going to happen if I went up there. So I didn't, until yesterday. I finally got fed up with the scratching and swallowed the sideways pill that was fear and pulled the staircase down. The familiar creak helped in no way to calm my mood. I was already sweating and I hadn't even made it up there. I took the first few steps carefully, my knees matching the ladder's shakiness. About halfway up, I could peek my head in and see around a bit. To the left of me was the unfinished side. To the right was a huge pile of Christmas decorations. Shiny red ornaments lay shattered on the floor, and a Santa figurine was staring dead at me. So far, that was the scariest thing I saw, so I made my way up the rest of the stairs. Of course, the first thing I did was clean up the decorations. I didn't want to have a mess up here when Christmas came around. While I was picking up the Santa figurine, that scratch came from behind me. It was coming from the unfinished side of the attic. That dread I spoke of before was in full force now. The sweat dripping off the tip of my nose seemed to turn ice cold. Slowly, I turned to look at what was causing the noise. I hoped it was a squirrel, but I wasn't that lucky. I didn't see anything. Well, let me rephrase that. I did see something, but I have no explanation for it. I heard the scratches and saw them appearing on the wall, but nothing was there to do it. I nearly jumped from the attic trying to get out of there. As a matter of fact, I broke the second to last step climbing down the ladder. I couldn't get that thing closed fast enough. I don't know what is up there, but I really prefer not to know. I'll deal with the scratching as long as whatever is doing it stays up there. I've stopped knocking in response. I fear that it will just anger it, whatever it is. I've heard a phenomenon called ghostwriting when words and phrases appear in photos, but this is something totally different. Before you ask, I didn't see if it was spelling something out, and no, I wasn't on drugs. I'm a pretty straight-edge dude, actually. I only drink on occasion and haven't smoked for about 6 years and have never touched a hallucinogen. I might look into it a little more and maybe even try to fix it. But for now, I'm just going to try and stay out of the attic. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community. Be sure to check out my Choose Your Own Path horror game on the iOS and Android App Store, and grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon. Links in the description. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.